The Iraqi government under mounting pressure as protests continue. Facing a bloody repression, will protesters' demands for meaningful change succeed? Hello and welcome to Bigger Than Five with me, Rida Fakhri. For the second month, Iraqis across the country have joined in the biggest anti-government protests yet. What started out as general discontent over unemployment, lack of services and widespread corruption quickly turned into a rejection of Iraq's ruling class and a demand to overhaul the country's entire political system, which has been in place since the 2003 US invasion. Now, since the protest began on October 1st, more than 330 Iraqis have been killed and 15,000 injured by live ammunition, tear gas and stun grenades. Many protesters accused government security forces and militias with close ties to Iran of being behind the violence. Iraq's Prime Minister, Adel Abdul Mahdi, whose government has been in place for just 1 year, pledged to enact a set of reforms. He reaffirmed his commitment to fighting corruption and reshuffling his cabinet. But his efforts were quickly rejected by the protesters, who say trust in the system has been completely broken. In a few moments, we'll be speaking with Iraq's Minister of Electricity about the ongoing unrest. But first, we hear from two protesters in Baghdad.
العراقيين ظهروا بسبب الظلم اللي دا يصير، بسبب الأحزاب، بسبب التكتلات اللي كلها هي المستفادة، والشاب اللي ما منتمي، اللي ما عنده أي انتماء حزبي راح يكون مظلوم. حاجز الثقة أصلاً ما موجود، يعني من 2008 وأنت صاعد، لأن خلصوها علينا وعود حنسوي انترنت ما أعرف إيش، وحنسوي مترو بغداد، وحنسوي وعود. مطالب المظاهرين تعديل الدستور، وأنا برأيي إعادة كتابته من جديد، تغيير النظام البرلماني إلى رئاسي، منع الأحزاب. المطلب الرابع أن تكون دولة مدنية بحتة. الحكومة العراقية أو الأحزاب بالأحرى ما تستقيل، لأن حكومتنا عبارة عن أحزاب مستفادة مادياً، لها جذور بكل الدولة العراقية، يستفادون صفقات فساد، تجي فلوس على الجاهز، ليش يستقيل؟ اكو واحد يعوف على الفلوس؟ هسه لا، احنا نريد وطن. المظاهرات العراقية نريد وطن، نريد نغير منظومة سياسية فاسدة من سنة 2003 مسيطرة على كل شرايين الدولة، من ناحية النفط، المنافذ، السياحة الدينية، كلهم مسيطرين عليها. الشهداء بدنا نحكي بصورة عامة، اللي مات دمهم هذا لمن قدموه للوطن. فأنا العدل تريدني أرجع للبيت ودم الشهداء بعد من جاء؟ لا، صعب، منعوف التحرير إحنا. يعني أنا أغلب الأصدقاء اللي أعرفهم اللي هنا عندنا خيارين، يا إما اعتقال يا إما موت. إحنا كنا طلعنا من التحرير لا ما نطلع، ثابتين إن شاء الله.
اليوم الناس يردون كرامة، يردون انتماء، يردون وطن، يردون أمان، يردون يطلعون بالشارع يأمنون على نفسهم، يقعدون بأي وقت نفس ما كان العراق سابقا. هاي المظاهرات أثبتت وحدة الشعب العراقي ووحدة الجيل الجديد، الجيل اللي هم بعدهم مراهقين وأطفال، يمكن صاروا إيد وحدة، ما بيها قيادة من فئة معينة، ولا تابعة لحزب معين، ولا تابعة لجهة. هاي المظاهرات عراقية بحت. مطالب المتظاهرين الحالية إسقاط الحكومة وحكومة إنقاذ وطني لمدة 6 أشهر، وبعدها إجراء انتخابات تحت إشراف أممي. ماكو بعد مفاوضات، انتهت، خاصة بعد الدم. يستحيل بعد هذا الدم وهاي الأعداد الهائلة من الجرحى والرصاص الحي وكل أنواع العنف اللي يستخدموها ويانا، بعد ماكو ثقة تماماً، انعدمت الثقة حالياً. المطالبة بإسقاط الحكومة كلها، ماكو ثقة بأي شخص تابع للعملية السياسية.
So then, can trust in Iraq's political class be restored? Joining me now from Baghdad is Iraq's Minister of Electricity, Lu'ay Al-Khatib. You just heard Mr. Al-Khatib, protesters in Baghdad say there is a complete breakdown in trust, that they no longer have faith in the political class. As a government minister, how do you respond to that? And how does your government regain people's confidence?
As an independent minister of this consensus government that emerged of the 2018 elections, We worked very hard in delivering reforms that much needed to change the situation imposed on Iraq post 2003 for the past 16 years. But as you may know, that time matters. And what Iraq needs is more of like an evolution as opposed to revolution. And I'm in this position focusing on basically delivering these reforms from my portfolio, the Ministry of Electricity. There are mistakes have been made, and we are working very hard. We cannot change everything in 12 months, but we need enough time to change the realities on the ground that's been entrenched in the past 16 years.
Well, you say the protesters need to give you more time, and in fairness, you've only been in office for about a year, but there has been an accumulated mistrust toward the government because of all these failed promises, not over just the last year, but over the last 16 years.
These protests been happening like year on year, and it's not specifically about this administration. That I might sound a bit biased, or I may sound like defending this administration, but these protests against the whole political practices that led to the current realities. And we need to work on delivering these reforms, and time matters. You mentioned electricity. In less than 12 months, we've delivered 25% improvements compared to last year. We've delivered enough megawatts and services, more than what Iraq was like enjoying on the 9th of April 2003 or during Saddam's era.
But people on the ground have grievances over the years. There have been serious blackouts, power failures. In fact, your own predecessor, over a year ago, lost his job because of blackouts that sparked violent protests in the south of Iraq and then spread to other parts of the country. Yet this is what you said just last May, 6 months ago. You said speculation 6 months ago suggested that there would be an Armageddon this summer and Iraq will fail to deliver electricity and that it would be the end of Iraq. You said everything is calm and people are happy. Did you grossly underestimate people's frustrations, people's realities? Or did you seriously believe just 6 months ago that the situation was calm and everyone was genuinely happy?
I received a few diplomats on starting this job a year ago, and they talked about how am I going to face a possible uprising or even a revolution in summer in Basra because of the situation in electricity. I said, we are planning to deliver a success story on electricity. We will change reality. We will not fix everything in 1 year, but there will be a notable improvement to start with.
But how do you explain, though, that Iraq's such a wealthy country? You've got such huge, proven oil and gas reserves. In fact, your production in oil has doubled over the last decade, yet you are a country that is still so heavily dependent on energy imports, and you haven't delivered in the last 16 years.
We delivered a good service this year. Basra was thriving on 12 hours in the past years. And before 2003, it was hardly enjoying 3 hours of services. This year, Basra enjoying 24 hours electricity. And many provinces enjoyed 25% to 30% improvement compared to last year's. And we are moving forward in changing the realities. As for the imports, it's temporary and it's not primarily on importing megawatts. All what we are importing is 1,000 megawatts during peak time. And during these times, we hardly import a single kilowatts. So things are moving and improving, but time matters. We cannot simply deliver 100% reform in less than a year. Look at other countries.
But when you look back at the wasted years, the years that have preceded your year in office, would you say that the failure so far to really deliver basic services like electricity to the majority of Iraqis up to this point, do you think it was based on corruption that people have been talking about, this deeply entrenched, endemic, systemic corruption, or was it perhaps a legacy of the US invasion and the system that they helped put in place?
It's because of both, and I wrote on these issues many times prior assuming this role, and it's dealing with the legacy of Iraq pre-2003, post-2003, the issue with the occupation of Iraq, and all these need to be changed. Iraq requires a significant reform and economy and political practices. Developing the democratic practice to be more and more acceptable and helpful for the people. All these things need to be taken in consideration, and time matters.
Well, time matters, you say, but one of the issues that many Iraqis seem to have a problem with is this bloated public sector. You have up to 6 million people employed in the public sector, in government jobs. As part of your significant reforms, would you look to slash this number? Do you believe that every department needs those huge amounts of people employed by them?
Very good question. To offload all these mass unemployment that thriving and siphoning basically the federal budget, we need to create a business environment that invite foreign direct investment, create private sector, and for the billions of dollars to pour into the country and develop the much needed business requirements for the reconstruction campaign. But for this, we need safety and security. The current scenes and burnings on the streets will not help Iraq, will not invite those investors, will refrain all the investors and foreign companies to come to Iraq. So we really need to work hand in hand with the people to create a safer environment, a much more stable environment to attract these investments and create jobs and start to offload the basically inflated public sector into private sectors and move on. We are in deficit, for example, in the housing sector, about 3.5 million housing units with a potential increase of about 10% year on year. This by itself will create millions of jobs if we have a safer environment to invite the multinationals to come and help building.
But let me ask you again, should so many people be on the government payroll? There are apparently ghost employees as well in some of these ministries. Let me just give you an example. The Ministry of Interior has about 600,000 employees. The Ministry of Defense about 300,000. How many employees does your ministry have?
My ministry has around 100,000 employees permanent on permanent roles, and nearly 25,000 contractors. But all what I need as a public sector, around 40,000 to run the show. Again, we inherited this from the past.
So just finally, would you say that the government has handled people's legitimate demands in the right way? Because many have accused it of being overly heavy-handed. Amnesty International says the government must immediately rein in its security forces. How would you characterize the way it has done things? And does it have control over its security forces, or are they subject to the will of militias that are roaming around?
The situation needs to be handled delicately, and we need to work fast, smart, and hard to introduce serious reform. We are very much serious in this administration to deliver change. We are just unfortunate that we are cornered by very little time, while everyone expecting wonders for this administration to produce and basically reverse all the bad practices that have been imposed on Iraq in the past 16 years. So rest assured, we are working day and night, 24/7, and delivering these reforms is just we need time. That's all.
All right, Lu'ay Al-Khatib, Iraq's Minister of Electricity, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Iraqis' frustration with their government's performance is nothing new. Anti-government protests have taken place nearly every year for the past 10 years, fueled by the lack of basic services. So why then has the country's leadership failed to deliver tangible results? Aus Haidari unpacks Iraq's deeper troubles in our 5 facts.
Iraq is the 13th most corrupt country according to Transparency International, which ranks 180 countries based on a set of corruption indicators. In 2018, Iraq's Parliamentary Transparency Commission found that $320 billion went missing since 2003 because of government corruption. With a weak private sector economy, the Iraqi government decided to increase the number of citizens on its payroll. The number of government employees expanded from 850,000 in 2004 to nearly 6 million in 2016, and every year, more than half of the country's budget goes to government employee salaries. Despite having the world's fifth largest proven crude oil reserves, Iraq's 2019 national budget came with a $23.1 billion deficit. Iraq's official unemployment rate is at 28%. 1 in 4 Iraqi children continue to live in poverty. There are also 3.2 million school-age children not enrolled. The 3-year fight against Daesh left Iraq with an $88 billion price tag for reconstruction. Donor countries pledged $30 billion, leaving the country $58 billion short. This does not include financial damages from the US invasion, estimated at $394 billion. There are at least 30 different militia groups in Iraq, also known as the Popular Mobilization Forces. Formed by local tribes, religious leaders, and political parties, they include a minimum of 125,000 fighters. While some were formed to join the fight against Daesh in coordination with the Iraqi government, many of these groups have strong ties to Iran and operate independently of the government.
And so, with Iran's vast influence in Iraq, how will the two countries' close ties be affected by the ongoing protests? To discuss the regional dynamics of what is going on, I'm joined from London by Iraq's former ambassador to the United Nations and the United States, Samir Soumaidai. And with me here in the studio in Washington, Bilal Wahab, fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Welcome to you both. Ambassador Soumaidai, hundreds of pages of recently leaked intelligence documents show us the extent to which Iran has wielded power and influence over Iraq. Talks between US and Iraqi officials were apparently reported back to Tehran. Informants who once worked for the CIA turned and became Iranian assets. To what extent is what is going on the streets of Baghdad motivated by the desire to change the dynamics?
Yes, good evening, Rita. None of these revelations have come as a surprise to any Iraqis. Iraqis already know the extent to which Iran controls the political system in Iraq. And the people have put 2 and 2 together and have decided that Iran's influence is malign, and it has resulted in the impoverishment of the Iraqi society and lack of services and lack of development in Iraq. So the revolution is against this combined Iranian influence and corruption.
Bilal Wahab, if there's nothing new in this equation, and this is something that Iraqis have long known, why are they now demonstrating, it would seem, partially against this influence?
Because the Iraqi public wants this government to work for them. And yet it seems that the political elite has chosen its own kleptocracy over the services for the public. Now, the protest started as asking for jobs and services and basic rights, electricity, but then soon it turned into an anti-Iran protest, mainly because the public, as these intercepts show, is the main guarantor of this system, the broker of this transactional political atmosphere, the wielder of patronage and transactions and contracts among thieves, so to speak, 1. And 2, is because of the heavy-handed approach that the government and some of the pro-Iran militias adopted in dealing with the protesters.
Iran's supreme leader, meanwhile, Ambassador Soumaidai, says that the United States and its allies are, quote, spreading insecurity and turmoil in Iraq and Lebanon. Was that a thinly veiled reference to Saudi Arabia's meddling? Is that also a valid criticism?
Well, I don't know about that. The people who actually wield influence in Iraq are the Iranians. It's not really the Americans, it's not really the Saudis. Everybody is trying to have, if you like, his influence in the field, but the people who actually have influence and doing the deals and allocating resources are the Iranians. And it is the Iranians who have the militias on the ground who terrorize people. It's the Iranians who have the militias who shoot people with live ammunition. What we have in Iraq, Rida, is the appearance of a state, but really behind it, there is a deep state. There's so much that goes on in Iraq that the government has no control over, and people are fed up with it.
But Bilal Wahab, is it fair to blame it all on Iran, or is there additional meddling going on from regional powers as well? Many would say Saudi Arabia. And what is the United States up to when it comes to Iraq? Ambassador Sumaya has already called it an exhausted and crumbling state that has been weakened from within.
I think the Iraqi public have decided not to shout against Saudi Arabia or against Jordan or against Turkey or against the United States, but particularly against Iran, because they see Iran as directly related to some of their suffering. And it's not just supporting the militias and also protecting the corrupt through a combination of carrots and sticks. But remember, while the Iranian government is asking the Iraqi Shia in particular, who are today on the streets, to subscribe to a cause, the cause of the Shia, Iran is also acting as a state in weakening Iraq to never fight Iran ever again, as it did between 1980 and 1988, and two, because Iraq is Iran's largest trade partner, to use it as a way to alleviate the economic pressures from the US sanctions on one hand, and also to curtail and stunt any economic development, any enterprise, any industry that may emerge that would probably weaken the Iraqi need for Iranian imports. So Iraqi farmers, Iraqi entrepreneurs, Iraqi small businesses also feel the brunt of how Iran uses influence to make sure that Iraq remains dependent, not only politically, but also economically on Iran.
But can the United States, Ambassador Sumaida, be absolved of any responsibility for the system that took place after the invasion? The fact that Iran, yes, was handed a much stronger hand, it's wielded influence, that it was handed a system that was created on the basis of ethnic politics and sectarianism, as you've written in the past, a quota system.
You are absolutely right. The United States has a lot to answer for. They facilitated the establishment of this power structure, allowed Iran plenty of scope, plenty of room to strengthen and establish their influence. So certainly the United States is not blameless. And I think it is important now to look at the way this crisis is being managed. It's not being managed by the Iraqi government, really. It's being managed by Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad. He is calling the shots. It's also important to pay attention to the maneuvering that's taking place within the political forces or parties who are like puppets in the hands of Iran. They are now trying to respond to the demands of the protesters by saying, yes, we will produce a new election law. Yes, we will do this. Yes, we will do that. And then we will do the adjustments to the constitution. And they want to basically repackage the same system. But I think people in the street are aware of this. They are looking at this with open eyes, and they are not going to have any of that.
They're not going to have any of that, Bilal Wahab. But what is the way forward? And just looking at things in hindsight, would it be fair to suggest that the majority of Iraqis were in fact better off before the US invasion, before 2003, in terms of security, in terms of stability, in terms of basic services, in addition to the fact that you didn't have Daesh, you didn't have a whole city like Mosul leveled, you didn't have the social fabric destroyed the way it has been?
The Iraqi people today, this younger generation that does not know Saddam Hussein, but they know the current leadership, so that comparison is irrelevant to them. What they want is, they want their country to make sense. It's a country that has oil, the second largest oil exporter in OPEC. Today, in 2019, the budget is $100 billion. And then look at what is famous about Iraq. We talk about the tuk-tuk, just as a kind of a small anecdote, which is exemplary. The tuk-tuk is this three-wheeler that you see in Bangladesh and these sort of very poor developing countries. That is the main means of transportation in a city like Baghdad. What are the trams? What are the metro systems? Where did the trillions of oil money that has been spent in that country? That is what they protest. It's not, a certain way of system, like democracy versus authoritarianism or Saddam Hussein to be back. They just want, what normal people think. They look at the other neighboring countries that have oil. They look at how the Kuwaitis live. They look at how even the Jordanians, who don't have any natural resources, live. Their country doesn't make sense to them, so they look around for someone to blame. The political system, you have so many political parties that are all in it together for the perks, too many hands to kiss, but no faces to punch. That's why they're angry at everyone. They want a systematic change rather than just a facelift.
Bilal Wahab and Ambassador Sumaid, I thank you both very much for being on the program. And so while the protesters' resolve doesn't appear to waver and politicians keep asking for more time to reform the political system, the Iraqi government faces a tough choice: to shake up the current balance of power or to continue to protect the status quo. But for many angry and disillusioned Iraqis, their country's future will depend on the government's ability and willingness to deliver on the needs of its people rather than the vested interests of some of its neighbors. From me, Rida Fakhri, and all the team here in Washington, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.